Hello, I'm Liz, one of Derry's reference librarians. Welcome to the new year and a new episode of Misinformation Busters. Once a week, we tackle a rumor or a false or misunderstood story, and we try to separate fact from fiction. This week, we're talking about something that might help 2021 get back to something resembling normal: the COVID-19 vaccine. So, what's the story? Really? If you don't know what COVID is now, I can't help you. I mean, it's the new coronavirus that turned the world upside down last year. People stayed home, movie theaters closed, schools went remote, businesses closed. It's been rough. But it now looks like there's light at the end of the tunnel because we have two vaccines, one from Pfizer and one from Moderna. But this is bringing concerns of its own, mainly because it arrived so quickly. Most vaccines take years to make, and the concern is that because it arrived so quickly, it means that something vital in the process was skipped. So, what are the facts? Contrary to some of the other concerns I've run into doing this video, no, 5G does not cause COVID, I would actually consider this to be a fairly reality-based concern. Normally, vaccines do take longer to make, and a vaccine in under a year is extraordinary, and I can see why people think it's too fast to be safe. But turns out there's really not much need for concern. There have been a lot of editorials, interviews, and columns from medical professionals stressing that quick doesn't mean the corners are cut. There are two key reasons why we got this vaccine out so quickly. The first is urgency, and the other is research. Let's look at urgency. One of the reasons vaccines can take years to develop is due to funding, and more specifically, getting funding and getting consistent funding. Does the name Operation Warp Speed sound familiar? This was announced by the Trump administration in March of 2020, freeing up funding for any company working on a vaccine. This means money for research, trials, manufacturing, distribution, you name it. That took away a huge hurdle that usually makes the process take longer. And we also had an unprecedented number of companies, countries, governments, scientists, research facilities, all working and communicating together. It's amazing what can be accomplished when everyone agrees what the number one priority is. The other big hurdle that the urgency of COVID helped was getting volunteers for the trial. Usually, getting enough people to volunteer for a vaccine trial can take a lot of time. And you know what makes getting volunteers for a trial easy? A pandemic. So we have two big factors that can slow down the process of vaccine production, expedited by the pandemic. Dr. Zain Shagla, associate professor in the Department of Medicine at McMaster University and an infectious disease physician, makes the point that even though the process is fast, the protocols are still followed. Quote, "It's not simply that a company can make up its own information. They hold a trial, there's a placebo group, there's independent bodies that monitor the data, there's independent bodies that monitor the safety, and there's independent bodies that monitor the ethics of these clinical trials." And that's important to remember. This stuff still has to hold up to the standards and the scrutiny of outside groups, and for both of these vaccines they have. Also, it's really good to remember that a bad vaccine would not be a good look for a company or a country. The other big reason, and potentially the bigger reason that these vaccines were made so fast, is because of research. COVID might be a new virus, but scientists have been researching coronaviruses for years. Do you remember SARS back in the early aughts? I do. Pushed my trip to China back a year. Anyway, SARS is also a coronavirus, and when SARS hit and was a big outbreak in Asia, research on that started, and it also continued when MERS hit in 2012. Allison Wise, a microbiology postdoc fellow at the University of Utah School of Medicine, explains, far better than I could, by the way, quote, "During the SARS-CoV-1 outbreak 18 years ago, researchers started looking at that virus and the other coronaviruses and found a really promising vaccine target on the virus cell surface, which is a protein called spike. That protein is what binds human cells and leads to an infection. So about 10 years ago, the science wheels started churning out strategies to vaccinate against SARS-1. Unfortunately, funding dried up for SARS-1 as the virus never made its way to the US, so a vaccine didn't actually get developed. However, the research on the virus and the ideas of how to vaccinate against it were already available. And when COVID appeared in late 2019 and became a pandemic in 2020, scientists had all of this research available to build on. The fact that they didn't have to start from scratch was vital to how quickly they were able to sequence COVID-19, study it, and create a vaccine. Funding and volunteers for trials helps, obviously, but if we did not have an 18-year head start on research, this vaccine definitely would have taken longer. This is pretty much a best possible scenario. Kind of like how, you have to have years worth of research to make an mRNA vaccine before you actually have an mRNA vaccine. Which, speaking of, spoiler alert, that is our topic next week, because some people have some very fantastical concerns about the mRNA vaccine. Thank you for watching, and as always, feel free to research using our EBSCO databases available through the library website, or, when in doubt, ask a librarian. Let's hope 2021 is a little less misinformation heavy, because I want to tackle some past conspiracies. And I'll see you next week.